For Family by Nanook 888. Chapter 10. The Rescue, Part 2. Captain! Sir, are you there? The captain bolted upright in his seat, promptly forgetting about the report he had been reading as he snatched up the comlink with equal measures of eagerness and trepidation. Yes, Lieutenant, go ahead. Sir, we have located the imposter. He gripped the comlink harder. You're positive? Yes, sir. He was spotted by a squad heading into a disused service shaft. My men are double-checking the blueprints, but we believe it might link with one of the decommissioned droid foundries. Shall we intercept? There was no time for relief. His heart hammered and his hands went clammy, but he willed his voice to be steady. No, pass the order to continue surveillance, but do not intercept. He cleared his throat. I will inform Lord Vader. Submit identification, the mechanical monotone demanded. Identify Han Solo. They all stared past the E5 blaster rifles at the B1 battle droids holding them up at gunpoint. You have got to be kidding me, Han said. Where did you old fossils come from? There was a momentary pause. Identification does not compute. Submit identification. Han laughed. Are they for real? There was a clatter of metal on metal, and the passageway behind the initial group filled with more droids, all of which also pointed their weapons at them. Great, bring it on! Han exclaimed. The more the merrier. Leia merely only shook her head at him and turned to the lead droid. What do you want with Han Solo? Suddenly, all the droids leveled their rifles at her. Preliminary identification established. Confirm identification. Han Solo. I don't think they want to be your friend, buddy, Lando quipped. Maybe I'll just tell them you're Han Solo, you scumbag. Han threw back. He instantly found himself staring down the barrels of more than 20 rifles. Ugh, give me a break. First I have a BS frozen sculpture, and now this. If it's any consolation, I thought you were pure art, Lando said, masking guilt with sarcasm. Yeah, well, I may be a beauty to behold, but it was still colder than hot in that crimping carbonite. While the two argued, Leia had been busy furtively glancing all around them for an escape route. There's a service platform alongside us. We'll go left, she said quietly, trusting the droids not to understand her. Chewie woofed softly in acknowledgement and secured an arm around Han's middle. Final alert, the lead droid droned. Confirm identification, Han Solo. Leia spoke clearly, pointing behind the droids. There's Han Solo! She was banking on the droids having sufficient navigation programming to understand the blatant direction, even if their language coding was only basic, and she was proven correct when all the droids turned as one and began shooting behind them. Go! She hissed. They leapt down onto the service platform and made a mad break for it. Turning left, momentarily placed the vat between them, and Leia fired across the amber liquid just as the droids turned back around, having not found Han Solo behind them. The blaster's shot skimmed the surface, spraying the nearest battle droids with liquid metal which seared through their visual receptors, armor, and rifles. She had only bought them a little time, however. The droids in the rear merely climbed over their fallen comrades and picked up the pursuit. Leia and the others fired over their shoulders as they continued to run. Mara. The name hung in the air. You know. A statement, not a question. Even with the impressive bruise forming on one side of her face, she managed to take on an expression of haughty disdain as all signs of camaraderie faded away. It took you long enough. Luke's head tilted fractionally in admission. He was aware of her hand reaching for the blaster at her side, but he made no move for his own weapon. Her gaze narrowed suspiciously. If you knew, why did you save me? Luke remained serene in the face of her demanding tone. You deserve better, he said simply. Emerald eyes blazed. Better, she repeated, mocking his ignorance. I am the Emperor's hand. I already have the best. The Emperor himself took me personally under his wing, gave me the best training, and made me the best I could be. Luke said nothing. He studied her, tracing her face as he seemed to consider something. What? She demanded. He sighed, his presence touched by sadness, and he shook his head. Nothing. He drew his legs beneath himself to stand, but she grasped his arm, shoving her blaster threateningly into his face. Look here, Skywalker. I've had enough of your wise looks and whatever it is that you're thinking in that righteous head of yours. I asked you a question, and you will answer it. Although she would never admit it in a million years, the most infuriating part of it all was that she actually wanted to know. It was just reconnaissance, she told herself. It definitely wasn't curiosity. He ignored her blaster, simply regarding her with a look of patient consideration that made her feel like a naughty child and ticked her off in completely the wrong way. Just when she thought she would explode at him in frustration, he relented. "All right," he said, settling comfortably on the floor again. "You have great potential, Mara." One raised eyebrow was the only response he received. Speak of the obvious. "You could do so much more. Did you know you're force sensitive?" He searched her eyes, only to be met with an impenetrable wall of disdain. "You could be a Jedi Knight someday. Or Sith," he amended at her arched look of disgust. "My master trains me in the ways of the Force. It's none of your business what I can or can't do. He is giving you basic training at best, nothing close to stretching you to your full potential. He has used the access to your mind to suppress your natural abilities. He's holding you back." She shook her head in disappointment. "I thought you would be smarter to think of something more convincing than this." "Are you aware of what you can do, even without extensive training?" he continued, undeterred. "On Yavin 13, you convinced a group of 5 troopers to take Leia onto the medium transport." She frowned. "What did that have to do with anything?" "When you spoke to them, were you surprised how easily they agreed?" "Of course not. They were influenced by the Force, Mara. I felt it." "This is ridiculous." "Even with your limited training, your great Force potential still aids you in your missions. How many times have you sensed danger before it occurred? Or had an intuition that turned out to be correct?" "They're just basic skills," she dismissed. "I mastered them years ago." Both statements were debatable, but Luke let them go. He knew of something else which nobody could claim was basic. "You can hear the Emperor's voice from anywhere in the galaxy. That itself is proof of your deep connection to the Force." She had no idea how Skywalker had come to learn such a closely guarded secret. It was only known to a few individuals carefully selected by her master. She began to have a sense of things perhaps not being entirely as she believed them to be, but she refused to let him see how his words affected her. "My master worked hard to establish the connection," she insisted with a confidence she didn't fail. "He's using you. Everyone is a tool to him." "Not me," she retorted. Blue eyes shimmered. "Especially you," outrage flared. "And anyone else he invites into his inner circle," he continued before she could argue. "He gives you a sense of empowerment and importance, just enough to keep you hooked, but never to achieve your full potential. If you deviate from his absolute authority, he makes you suffer until you succumb. Then he rewards you for your returning faithfulness. It's a form of control. It keeps you tied to him. He makes you resent him, but need him. Makes you capable enough to serve him, but never enough so you can leave him." Of course, Mara was unquestionably loyal to her master, and she had never before entertained such a point of view, but the words triggered flashbacks of her carefully regimented upbringing. It couldn't be argued that her master dealt both instruction and discipline with the same hand, and where encouragement one moment could so easily transform into harsh punishment the next, dreading the pain of his corrections left her in an almost desperate state of striving to please him. He had once explained that he had to be severe for her own good, to eliminate indolence and ensure she always aimed to better herself. And she believed it, as she did everything else he told her. But here was another possibility entirely. Part of her training was on objective analysis, examining the evidence with an open mind, and the cogs in her mind started turning in an area she had hitherto been conditioned not to consider. Fear stirred in the face of the unknown on the doorstep of uncertainty, and she experienced an overzealous desire to defend her master and her position in his service. "My master was right. He warned me you would use all manner of deception and treachery to undermine my loyalty." Luke sighed. "He hasn't been honest with you. Does he tell you that you are the only Emperor's hand?" She snapped back almost instantly. "I am the only Emperor's hand!" He shook his head. "There are many others. Even back when he was the Chancellor of the Old Republic and he had to conceal the fact that he was Sith, he had numerous spies and assassins. The rule of 2 restricts him to a single apprentice, so he has a network of agents, all strictly operatives. He's largely hidden you from each other and made you all believe you are the only one, to keep you loyal." "No!" But even as she automatically protested, she recalled occasions in the past when certain individuals in the Imperial Palace had caught her attention. A musician, a private guard, an advisor, a technician, a door attendant. They all, to a fault, looked as if they belonged there, as she herself did when disguised as a court dancer. But they almost looked as if they belonged too well. And her trained eye had detected signs of superior movement and skill concealed beneath a veneer of normality. She had even tracked a waiter once, convinced that he was a spy, but her master had put a stop to that. "He's been taken care of," he had said, then given her an urgent assignment. Had that merely been a diversion? And the Emperor was always very careful exactly when she was admitted to his presence. Rather than being the Emperor's hand, might she only be one of many? Yet another attack on already shaken foundations made for an explosive combination. She shook her head furiously. "He wouldn't conceal something like that from me!" She thrust forward the blaster in anger, intending to fire, but Luke moved blindingly fast and wrenched it out of her hand. Her natural reaction would have been to lash out at him in another way, but his next two words shocked her off kilter. "Your parents." He met her eyes gravely. "They died a terrible, unnatural death, Mara. I won't tell you what happened, but if even the smallest part of you is wondering if I speak the truth, if you felt anything at all for us during your time with the rebellion, then go to the Emperor's Surgical Reconstruction Center and search his classified archives for your parents' medical log. You'll find the truth there, and all the proof you'll require to know just who and what was involved." Her eyes widened at the implication, and she felt ill. It was too much. "Lies! All lies!" She struggled to stand, bracing herself against the wall. Luke reached out to help, but she slapped his hand away. "You're fortunate that I'm injured, else I would kill you right here. You know nothing. You've never even met the Emperor. How could you know any of this?" He said nothing, simply tilted his head as if to ask, "Do you really want to know?" She glared at him, her anger intensifying as he continued to sit there with perfect composure whilst her own was shattered to pieces. "Why don't you amaze me?" she taunted with an indifference she didn't feel. "What fantastic rationalization have you come up with?" He considered her, the force swirling. "Vader." She looked at him and burst into genuine sardonic laughter. "Vader! Oh, this is good! You're really pulling out all the stops now!" "Vader knows the intricate workings of the inner circle around the Emperor. He knows of your training and missions. He knows of your potential. He knows, Mara." "And why in the galaxy would Lord Vader tell you?" "It's yet another fact that the Emperor thought you didn't need to know." Luke spoke with deadly seriousness. "Vader is my father." She stared at him, torn between laughing and simply gaping, as she already seemed to be doing. The suggestion was so ridiculous that she wondered how Skywalker could possibly think she'd believe it. And yet it was so ridiculous that it almost could be... "Your father?" she repeated as a nervous shiver clawed its way down her spine. "Why did Palpatine send you into the rebellion, Mara? Was it to spy on me and gauge the nature of my relationship with my father? Vader wasn't briefed on the mission objectives, so he had to guess. But that fact in itself suggests he might be right." The look on her face seemed to confirm it as well. "Palpatine suspected that Vader will join forces with me and betray him. That's why you were sent to investigate." Her mind quickly connected a series of dots, and her green eyes suddenly gleamed as if she had just stumbled upon a valuable bounty. If Vader was telling the Jedi secrets, it was strongly indicative that he was indeed plotting with Skywalker. And telling secrets Vader certainly was. Speculation aside, there were elements in what Skywalker had just mentioned which could only have come from a close, inside source. She would be proud to inform her master of her findings, a potential arsenal to bring down the Sith Lord. And who knows, perhaps she might take Vader's place at her master's right hand. But then, just as quickly, her face drained of all color as another natural conclusion occurred to her. Vader telling Skywalker secrets in order to gain an ally also increased the likelihood of the Jedi telling the truth. The fear that had started stirring earlier now distended into a dead weight and lodged itself squarely in her gut. In only a few minutes, Skywalker had brought her entire existence into question, leaving her unexpectedly thoroughly shaken. It was only due to a desperation to hide just how much he had affected her that she managed to fix on the one clear point she had deduced. So, Vader has betrayed the Emperor. This did nothing to affect Skywalker's sage-like calm. Unaware that he and Vader supposed that the Emperor most likely already knew, she attributed his lack of fluster to yet another aspect of his infuriating Jedi qualities. Betrayal is the way of the Sith, Mara. Palpatine was no exception. He betrayed and murdered his own master. And Vader will betray you. Luke shook his head. My father will not betray his family. Thoughts of his mother floated into mind, but he firmly put that notion to rest. Darth Vader was no more. Palpatine knows this, he continued. That's why, over 20 years ago, he told my father that his wife had died when she still lived. Vader's family needed to be removed to ensure his loyalty. If Mara had thought the idea of Darth Vader having a son was strange enough, the prospect of a wife seemed even more inconceivable. Luke rose to his feet. She jarred back a step, ignoring the sharp pains, and instantly on guard. You deserve better, Mara, he said, his voice gentle as he repeated his earlier sentiment. You've had no one but Palpatine to guide you since you were young, and you're not to blame for that. But you need to choose your own path now. You've lived among us for a month now. You know who we are. You've seen for yourself. We aren't the corruption Palpatine would have you believe we are, and he isn't the honorable father figure he's conditioned you to believe he is. His blue eyes softened. And I don't believe you're as cold-hearted as he's tried to make you be. She was cast adrift in a sea of doubt and fear. In defense against it all, she gathered what was familiar to her, anger and hate. She regarded him coldly as she drew herself up to her full height, heedless of her injuries. I am the Emperor's hand, Skywalker, and nothing you can say or do will undermine my loyalty to my master. They stared at each other in stalemate. Mara was all too aware that if the situation was reversed, and it was Luke who was injured instead, she wouldn't hesitate to bring him down. She was also aware that the Jedi, in his weak-minded and deluded sense of fairness, wouldn't fight her while she was so disadvantaged. I'm leaving now, she stated, as if daring him to stop her. But somehow she knew he wouldn't. He did manage to surprise her, however, when he pressed her blaster back into her hand. Go to the Sioux Recon Center, if only to prove me wrong. He held onto her hand for a moment longer and gazed deep into her eyes. You have a great capacity for life, Mara. I'm here for you if you ever decide on another way. She snatched her hand free and holstered her blaster without thanks. When we meet again, Jedi, it will be the end of you. Unable to face his sad, compassionate blue eyes anymore, she turned her back on him with a defiant flick of her red hair and limped away. The cacophony of intense blaster fire reached Luke long before he arrived at the gaping maw in the corridor that must have been blown open when the bounty hunter had crash-landed. The cruelly exposed wiring and metalwork along the floor, walls, and ceiling bore the telltale scorch marks of Boba Fett blasting an opening to prevent Slave 1 from being smashed to pieces in its descent, leaving its explosive path carved along all the levels above and below, as if a giant space worm had jumped its way through the core of the planet. If Luke peered hard enough, he could see a small patch of the darkening sky high above him. It was downward, however, where his attention was drawn. It was an old storage warehouse some 3 levels below him, where the battle raged. Leia, Lando, and Chewie were hunkered down behind what appeared to be the front end of an old gunship predating the Clone Wars. And advancing on them from the opposite side of the warehouse were hundreds of battle droids. Luke had to blink to check he wasn't imagining things. No, they were still there. An endless stream of pre-Clone War battle droids marching into the warehouse in perfect unison, with guns blazing. Movement across the wide gap caught his attention, and he turned that way to find Tran and Mazay were likewise looking down at the battle. They were just one level up from the warehouse and pointing this way and that, as if trying to find a way down. Luke nudged them with the Force and gave them a nod when they spotted him. Tran signaled. Go down? No. Wait. Luke studied the scene below him. As his friends moved to throw some token shots over their cover against the constant deadly fire peppering them, Luke spotted a mass of brown hair amongst them and realized they must have unfrozen Han. His mouth tucked into a grin. He should have known. Trust Han to lead them into such ridiculous odds. The partial gunship was disintegrating rapidly under the heavy fire, and Luke knew his friends didn't have much more time under the current assault. He glanced around, but found nothing he could use to throw at the droids, and knew there was only one option. He caught Tran's eye and signaled. Hold positions. Use height advantage. Provide cover. Drown saluted his acknowledgement and promptly began raining fire down on the droids with maze. Luke summoned his lightsaber to hand and leapt straight down the gaping hole amidst the dense blaster fire. Landing in a whoosh of air directly before the disintegrating gunship, he activated his green blade and engaged the battle droids. Boba Fett easily followed the sounds of battle resonating through the droid foundry and located the rebels in the warehouse. Once he had regained some movement in his limbs, it hadn't taken him long to free himself from the mountain of debris he had been buried under, and with his jetpack, he had quickly covered the distance between them despite the nauseating sway in his head. But he could deal with the concussion. What irked the most was how the Jedi had toyed with him. He gritted his teeth. Skywalker would learn the error of not taking him seriously. From his vantage point 12 floors above, looking down through the gaping hole he had blasted clear on his arrival, Boba Fett watched as Skywalker pitched head first into the line of the droids' onslaught and began dispatching them in droves. Despite his hatred of all things Jedi, he grudgingly had to acknowledge this one skill. Quite in contrast to Vader's full-on, overpowering style, there was a fluidity that bordered on elegance, but still packed equal power. Fett knew that there were thousands more droids activating and heading in their direction, but Skywalker's skill was cause for concern. No, he amended, not concern. He just needed a contingency plan, in case the rebels managed to pull off another demonstration of their tiresome propensity to escape tricky situations. He would ensure that the last blast they received was one they could not possibly survive. He drew forth a thermal detonator. Before he could charge it, the photoreceptor in his helmet adjusted and zoomed in on the warehouse floor as a new figure entered the fray. He paused as he saw the black mask, armor, and cape. Vader? Why was Vader here, and where was he defending the rebels? But it soon became clear that something wasn't right. Although the figure was wielding Vader's signature lightsaber and meeting the battle droid's blaster fire, there was a motorized robotic pattern to its movements, and Fett realized it couldn't be alive. Only a droid could spin its arms in perfect circles. Had the rebels created it? He could have laughed if he wasn't feeling so ill. No sooner had he come to that conclusion than there was a familiar chilling hiss behind him, and Fett spun, his rifle instantly ready in his free hand and trained on the intruder. His head lurched alarmingly, clouding his vision with black spots, which cleared so slowly that he was sure he would be dead before he regained his senses. "Lord Vader," he greeted as soon as he was sure he could speak without vomiting. It was the genuine article looming not 5 paces from him, looking as sure-footed and powerful as ever. "Your bounty has escaped you," the deep rumble mused. "Not for long." Boba Fett spared a glance at the activity far down below. The horde of droids were crowding the 2 lightsaber wielders with their sheer numbers and driving them back towards the fragmented gunship. "The rebels have rescued Solo, but every bounty hunter in the Hutt's employ believe you still have him. Not only have you forfeited Jabba's reward, but you will be targeted by others while your ship is heavily damaged, and you are in no condition for combat." Fett wasn't surprised that Vader had picked up on that last point, but did wonder what his game was. The Sith Lord wouldn't be pointing at the obvious unless it served some purpose. "I offer you a choice, bounty hunter. Leave now, and the Empire will compensate you Jabba's reward." Fett remained deadpan. "Why?" "I want Skywalker alive. No disintegrations. You will deactivate the battle droids and leave the rebels to me." Fett shook his head, an action he immediately regretted. He clenched his jaw and willed the world to stop bitching. "The droids have destroyed their signal receptors. They cannot be deactivated." There was no noticeable change in the hiss of the respirator, but Boba Fett could have sworn it sounded peeved. "The alternative?" he pressed before Vader got any ideas to do something about it. A blood-red lightsaber hummed to life from within the folds of the black cape. Had he just made the alternative worse with the droids not being in his control? He had no idea, but with his blasted concussion, he knew he had little choice. But he still hesitated. He had a reputation to uphold. Having accepted Jabba's assignment, he was duty-bound to deliver Solo, whether alive or in pieces. "It may interest you to learn that Skywalker's father had a hand in the death of Mace Windu." Fett's gaze narrowed behind his helmet as Vader's words suddenly made it personal. Intimately so. Skywalker's father. Presumably he meant Anakin Skywalker? And how would Vader know of that Jedi's deeds?
"Leave, bounty hunter,"
Vader pressed.
"and you will be compensated."
Fett had too many questions, but they would do him no good if he followed his father to his grave. He would regroup and investigate. He raised his rifle away from Vader. As you wish. A loud blast from below caught their attention, and they turned just as the Vader-like droid exploded into 1,000 black fragments 12 floors below. In the moment of distraction, the thermal detonator was snatched from loose fingers by an invisible hand. That cursed himself for such an elementary error and made a grab for it, but too late. It sailed into Vader's outstretched palm. Do not let me see you here again, the Dark Lord warned before he marched away with his cape billowing in his wake. The two ships were still in the small docking station. Mara limped around the Falcon, careful to remain out of sight of its viewports, knowing that Skywalker's 2 droids were on board. She gingerly lowered herself into a crouch behind one of its leg struts and pulled a micro-tracer from a hidden seam in her boot. Activating it, she tucked it into the narrow gap between 2 dura-alloy plates. She took a moment to check her handiwork, ensuring it was practically invisible unless one knew it was there. Grasping the leg strut to heave herself achingly to her feet, she headed for the stock Corellian freighter. Although the ramp of the YT-2400 was visible from the Falcon's cockpit, it was no longer of any consequence whether she was spotted, and she walked in plain view as she boarded. After all, even for one as oblivious as 3PO, it would be rather difficult not to notice one of the ships flying off. In no time at all, she shot out of the foundry's subterranean entrance and headed for space, taking the fastest, most direct route the freighter could bear. As she reached the stratosphere, however, the sight of the Executor orbiting higher up in the distance brought her up short. She pursed her lips as she stared at Vader's signature flagship, an unbearable sense of doubt staying her hand from nudging the lever to jump to light speed. Eventually, she sighed, shaking her head at her own folly, and turned the ship around. We're better off without it, kid, Han shouted over the thudding of guns. It was a nightmare on legs just waiting to turn on us. Once they had recovered from their initial alarm at its arrival, the objective of Vader's droid double to help them had quickly become apparent, and they had all warily accepted its assistance. All except Han. There had been no time yet for anyone to explain recent events to him. But even when they did, Luke suspected the former smuggler would remain utterly distrustful of their new ally. It was helping us, Luke hollered back, dodging a succession of blazing red trails of blaster fire as he sidled closer to a group of droids. By the time the 12th shot was fired, his lightsaber had found its mark, and the droids were tumbling to the floor in pieces. All had their arms sliced off. He had learned to be cautious after one droid had continued firing after being decapitated and nearly shot him in the back. It was relentless. Luke had tallied the highest number of kills by far, but his friends also maintained a heavy onslaught against the droids from behind their cover, including Han, who refused to be hampered by his immobile legs, and Tron and Maizei showered the droids from their vantage point. They must have downed hundreds of droids by now, but they just kept coming out. Nobody was counting. Han saw his young friend incapacitate 4 droids in a clean sweep before risking a narrow miss to close in on a 5th. Simultaneously, the broken parts of a trio he had sliced up only seconds earlier shot through the air seemingly of their own accord to crash into some droids trying to edge their way around the gunship towards Leia. All the while, more droids fell in quick succession under the green lightsaber, which also continued to deflect blaster fire with impossible precision. Han had no idea how much time he had lost frozen in carbonite. That much he now remembered. But the change in the kid was nothing short of astounding. Although Luke had been a good fighter before, he was never this dangerous. Lethal was the word that crossed Han's mind. Luke was aware of his comlink beeping, but it was a while before he was able to answer it. Oh, Master Luke, it's simply terrible, sir. It was completely unexpected and— Go on, 3PO, what happened? Luke interrupted before his droid could wax lyrical about how awful the news was. Single-handedly, he deflected 3 shots back to the droids who had fired them and carved another one in half when it tried to sneak up from behind. Oh dear, it sounds very noisy there, sir. Are you— 3PO, did something happen? Luke reminded gently with the patience of a saint as he twisted past a droid trying to smash his head in with the butt of its rifle and drove it with a sharp kick into another droid charging his way. Oh, yes, sir, the second freighter is gone. R2 was able to connect briefly with the ship's computer, and he insists that it was Miss Kara who initiated the engine sequence. But personally, It's okay, 3PO, Luke said, relieved that the news hadn't been to say that they had been abducted. He had anticipated that Mara would leave on one of the ships, but his one concern had been whether she might attempt to take the Falcon with his droids on board. He had refrained from warning them, as he didn't want them confronting the business end of her blaster. He was about to add something reassuring when a flicker of the force caught his attention, and he instead brought the conversation to a hasty close. "Stay on the Falcon with R2. We'll get to you as soon as we can." He launched himself over the gunship. "Heads up!" His friends started at the sight of him, crouched right behind them, lightsaber still aglow in his hand. How he had suddenly appeared there in the blink of an eye was beyond them. Han slapped him heartily on the back, and Luke gripped his arm in a gesture of brotherly affection. But their reunion was necessarily brief in the midst of battle. "We're about to have company again," Luke warned, wearily meeting Leia's gaze. "The real deal this time. Don't shoot him!" Then he was gone, somersaulting back over the gunship into the foray. Han barely had time to wonder at his meaning or Leia's grim expression before they were desperately trying to drive back the wall of droids which had gained considerable ground in the momentary hiatus. Then, over the record of blaster fire, he heard that hiss. The sound slithered through him like icy tentacles, chilling him to the bone, as if he was frozen in carbonite all over again, and Luke's warning promptly fell out of his mind. "Look out!" He was already firing at the black-armored monstrosity who had dropped out of the sky into the thick of battle with his blood-red lightsaber flashing. The shots were eaten up by the mass of droids before someone shoved Han's arm to the side. "Aye!" Any further protest died in his throat when he saw who it was. "Leave him!" Leia shouted into his ear over the din. "Just shoot the droids, okay?" "Leave him!" he repeated, dumbfounded. He turned incredulous eyes to emphasize just who they were talking about, only to see Luke leap into the air to deflect some shots fired by Meze at Vader. Luke landed with his back to the Dark Lord, gave Meze a firm shake of his head, and then he was fighting side by side with Vader as, together, they carved a trail of destruction through the swarm. Han's jaw dropped. Had they all completely lost it while he was out of it? He suddenly recalled Luke's hurried warning and only became all the more confounded. "What the—" "Later, Han, please!" Leia pressed, her eyes pleading that this was not the time to be difficult. Chewie was also yowling, urging him to drop it, as he continued alternately firing his pulsecaster and swinging it in any unfortunate droid they came too close. With a roll of his eyes, hands thrown heavenward, and with an almighty huff, he put his trust in his friends. "Fine, but this is insane. You have a lot of explaining to do." Or he was rewarded with a quick peck on the cheek before Leia leaned around him to resume firing at the droids. They were a formidable pair. Unhindered by the difference in their physical stature, Anakin and Luke wove around each other in perfect accord like a single four-armed beast to launch a devastating attack on the droids. Their lightsabers flashed around them in a dazzling display of red and green sparks, parrying blaster fire and incapacitating battle droids with inhuman speed. On Bespin, they had repelled each other like two opposite poles of a magnet. Their affinity now, however, could not have been closer, as they drew as one on the Force. It had been a long time since two warriors of such gifts had resonated in perfect harmony, and the light side of the Force responded. It lit ablaze and swelled, becoming ever more brilliant and intense until it burst, reverberating with their power, sending shockwaves to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, evocative of the heyday of the Jedi Order. For a fleeting moment their eyes met, both taken aback as the exuberance of the Force washed through them. "The Emperor will sense it," Luke said to his father as they continued to take down scores of droids crowding the front end of the gunship, their every movement in tune with each other. "It can't be helped," Anakin replied, "but it might spur him to do something rash and foolish." Leia was rendered momentarily paralyzed as a surge of something she couldn't identify coursed through her spine. It was uplifting, energizing, and she was left shuddering on a high. And with it the world fell quiet and the battle around them suddenly seemed to freeze. Now they were still moving, but incredibly slowly, she realized, as she watched Chewie's hair swing in slow motion as he rotated gradually towards a droid that appeared bit by bit around the side of the gunship. It was surreal, like a dream. But at the same time, she felt intensely alive, as if every moment had stretched into thousands more, and every sense had become vibrantly vivid. Somehow, the feeling reminded her of Luke. She glanced toward him, only to be met by his startled blue eyes through a gap in the dozen or so droids frozen between them. She realized when he blinked that he was still moving at the same speed as her, only appearing to have slowed down like the others because he was staring at her in shock. She smiled at him, buzzing with the incredible energy and only mildly curious at the coincidence that he should look towards her at exactly the same time. The curiosity morphed into concern, however, when she noticed that Vader had also looked her way over the top of the battle droids. Why were they both looking at her? She glanced from one to the other, and why were the three of them the only ones still moving at normal speed? Before she could think on that any further, she felt the faintest pressure on the back of her head, as if someone had hit her with a pillow, and she turned, only to find herself staring down the barrel of a rifle. In slow motion, she heard the click of the droid's finger depress the trigger, the whir of the chamber as the plasma bolt was released and routed through the barrel. Before the energy bolt could emerge, however, a red blade came spinning from behind to slice through both the blaster and droid. They tumbled to the ground, and she followed the returning trajectory of the spinning lightsaber to meet Vader's gaze in a mixture of amazement and horror. He had just saved her life. She felt that strange pressure again, only this time it was much more intense and from the front. Before she could react, the blaster fire thudded into her. No! She didn't know who had shouted, Luke, presumably, his lone cry ringing out over the strangely silent battlefield. Numbly, she looked down at the neat black hole in her shoulder. A dark red smudge appeared on the edges of the hole, then gradually seeped outwards across her green jumpsuit. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she was aware of her blaster slipping from her right hand. She lifted her head, straining with the heavy weight of it, following the trail of the blaster fire that seemed imprinted on her mind to its source. Tran stood frozen on the ledge above, his white face aghast. A black haze crowded her vision, blocking her sight until all she could see was a narrow tunnel in the center. As the tunnel rapidly shrunk to pinpoints, she saw Luke's horror-stricken face ever shrinking as if from a great distance. She reached for him. Then there was nothing.